Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. What do you get when you combine a Benedictine monk, a math teacher, and a money manager? The answer? You get Doug Lynam. Today, our guest is not your typical financial advisor. He, for many, many years, a couple of decades, lived in the silence of a monastery. But since those days, Doug has traded in his robes for spreadsheets, kind of, but mostly for writing books. He has not lost his commitment to spiritual integrity and service and doing that deep inner work of transformation, but he's bringing it into a new form that can truly help others. He's the author of 2 groundbreaking books that bridge the inner world of consciousness with the outer world of cash flow. His first book, From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay, is truly something that you should read if you have an interest in learning more about financial success, the ins and outs of investing, and how to make peace with your bank account. The book that we're looking at today is his newest book that I'm so excited about because if you've ever worked with me in a coaching capacity, or if you listen regularly to the podcast, you might remember how excited I get talking about Enneagram types. And I use the Enneagram a lot in my individual coaching work. We always explore what your Enneagram pattern is and how that might be showing up in your life, how it's affected you, and what those deeper inner wounds are. And so today we're going to look at how your Enneagram pattern might be showing up in your relationship to money. And so Doug is going to help us uncover our hidden emotional pattern. He combines the attachment styles with how we are relating to our bank accounts or to money as it comes in or goes out. And these are what he calls the money monsters, which are some of the shadow sides of what each Enneagram number brings, as well as the emotional pattern that money can conjure up in us. And so with deep insight and a refreshingly non-dogmatic approach, Doug is going to show us that financial success doesn't have to come at the expense of our values. And in fact, when done right, wealth can be a vehicle for wisdom, and it truly is. So today we're talking Enneagram types, attachment patterns, money shame, conscious investing, and what it really means to live a financially empowered and spiritually aligned life. How those two can coexist and do coexist when we are living with integrity. I cannot wait to share this conversation with you, so let's jump right in. Hi, welcome. My guest today is going to be a real treat. His name is Douglas. How did I pronounce your last name?
Lynam, like line them up.
Lynam. Oh, nice. Douglas Lynam. I didn't usually ask before, so I look really prepared, but
Nobody gets it right.
Don't mispronounce anything. But then I was like, I'm going to ask because I don't think I'm going to say it right. Douglas Lynam. And you have a really interesting story. We're going to get into all the things, the places where spirituality converges with finances, and talk about it, because I feel like this is one of those conversations that a lot of people, I mean, maybe it's every person, you could probably shed some light on that, but especially like healers and yoga teachers and spiritual practitioners, of which you were also
Mm-hmm.
and probably still are.
Yep, absolutely.
um, yeah, have a lot of shame around, or they feel like it's a taboo subject. They don't like to
Yeah.
talk about it, which leads to all kinds of interesting challenges in life.
Yeah, and unnecessary stress and problems if you don't deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's first talk about your story, because I think your story is so interesting and unique. You started off as a Marine.
Mm-hmm. Yep, went to officer candidate school with the Marine Corps. I graduated top of my class, and then took a bit of a turn from there.
Okay, what took, like, okay, first of all, what was it that provoked you or instigated you signing up for the Marines? Like, that's not a just like an everyday kind of decision.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of reasons for it. I was I was a kind of an academic environment and kind of a brainiac, and was looking for a shift, something different, and looking to prove I was a manly man who could do manly things and try to impress my father. And, that didn't really work very well. But, I was trying to I was always a geeky kid who hid out in the library during recess, and it's like I wanted to kind of overcome a lot of my body shame and a lot of my sort of issues around masculinity. And I thought, well, this is a good way to prove the world that I'm not a complete wuss. And so that was one reason. I was also looking for meaning and structure and purpose and the esprit de corps and the brotherhood and camaraderie that I loved about the Marines. And then I realized after I finished officer candidate school that unresolved anger issues and high explosives were a very bad combination and probably not a good career choice. So I just didn't need to be projecting my daddy issues on people around the world with a high explosive weapon. So that's being a little bit glib, but there's truth to it. And so then I kind of had a spiritual awakening and was looking for a different direction in my life, something that would be equally challenging, but would still give me the structure and the purpose and the brotherhood that I loved about the Marines without maybe running around and killing a bunch of people. So I ran off and joined a monastery. I became a Benedictine monk where I stayed for 20 years.
Wow, wow. Okay, again, that transition is kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like we're going to all spectrums of yourself and your
Right.
spirit. I have some questions about this, like what instigated this. I have a close friend who was also in the US military, and he really, it sounds like a very similar story, was kind of craving structure and discipline and wanting to challenge himself in this way. Also very intelligent, became a professor of Sanskrit at Berkeley University after. But he, for him, what he found was he could really take a lot of the kind of aggressive abuse that would come from the superior officers. But
Mm-hmm.
when he had graduated and was now in that position of having to be that person who's kind of aggressively
Mm-hmm.
distributing the discipline, or to others, that really rubbed him the wrong way. He started to get quite depressed about having to take on that character. What was it for you that sort of was this shift? I mean, that's a pretty big shift to decide, like, I'm not doing this thing that I've invested my whole self into.
Yeah, well, so I graduated. So I trained in the Marines during college, during my summers. And so in order to receive your commission, you need to complete your training, and then you need to also have completed your degree. And so I finished the training, but I didn't have my degree yet. So I sent me back for my senior year of college. And so I had this year to kind of sit on it and think about this decision. And during that time, I also had a close mentor, a professor of mine in college who had served with the Marines in Vietnam, and kind of made a point to kind of take me under his wing a little bit and made sure I really understood the history of the Marines and the history of America's geopolitical conflicts. And I thought, we'll never do something stupid like that again. We're never going to get ourselves involved in another senseless, stupid war like Vietnam again. But I didn't. There was a nagging doubt. I loved the Marines, but I didn't necessarily trust our political leadership to use that tool effectively and with right purpose. And so that was one reason. And I turned out I was right. If I had stayed, I would have been shipped off to Iraq and Afghanistan for sure. So I'm really glad I managed to avoid those conflicts and did not go active duty. So it was a hard decision. It took a lot of gut check, but eventually I'm glad I made the decision that I did.
Yeah, wow. And what were you studying in school?
Well, I went to a funky little liberal arts school called St. John's College here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's actually the third oldest college in the country. They have a second campus in Annapolis, Maryland, where I actually did my junior year. And so it's like, I think it's like King William and William and Mary, and then St. John's are like, so it's not a religious school. It just happens to have that name because of the colonial history of the college, and essentially. But it's a really weird school where everyone studies the same thing for 4 years, and so there's 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of language, then 4 years of like literature and philosophy with some music and some art and some other things thrown in for good music, thrown in for good measure. But you
Yeah.
study each of those subjects in chronological order, starting with the Greeks and Romans in your freshman year and moving up to the 20th century by your senior year. And you only use original source texts. So there's no lectures. Everything's discussion based. So if you're learning mathematics, you're learning it geometry from Euclid, you're learning physics from Newton, and relativity from Einstein. So it's sort of the intellectual equivalent of the Marine Corps, if you want to think of it that way. So it was sort of like that. So like the Marine kind of gave me the physical rounding out to this very heady, it's sort of academic background that I have.
Oh, that's so interesting. I did a degree in philosophy, and so that sounds right up my alley because you definitely kind of go down that path anyway when you're studying philosophy as well.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
areas of philosophy did you specialize in?
I mean, I mostly specialized eventually in existentialism, but I mean, to get a full philosophy degree, you have to
Do all
do,
of it.
classical and
Mm-hmm.
go through the whole every area you have to at least kind of touch into. So, yeah.
Oh, the existentialists are my favorite, by the way, so we can share common ground there. We can geek out on
Yeah,
that
yeah.
anytime you want.
Maybe, maybe there's like some existentialism, Enneagram kind of.
Yeah, I'm sure we can come up with it. Give us some time.
Yeah. So what was it then you decide to leave that then like becoming a Benedictine monk
Hmm.
was like your next best option or
Yeah.
choice or
Yeah,
path? Like what?
well, it was like I wanted to, if I was going to leave the Marines, I wanted to leave for a higher calling. I wanted to kind of trade up a little bit.
Okay.
And so I felt like the
Okay.
monastic life would again give me the structure, excuse me, the structure and discipline and the camaraderie I liked about the Marines, but with hopefully a higher purpose.
Yeah. And so what was that like? 20 years as a Benedictine monk?
It's like any good and bad. There's some great parts about it. There were some awful parts about it. It's 20 years, so it's hard to encapsulate it in a nutshell. But I would say the first five years were fantastic. The next five were
Yeah.
kind of rough, and then it kind of became like a bad marriage. I'm going to stick it out. I made this commitment. I'm going to make it work. It's going to get better, and then it just didn't. And after a while, the
Yeah.
community kind of fell apart, and so it was time to leave and move on to do something else.
Wow. Were you doing like regular sort of routine like
Mhm.
waking up at a certain time, praying at a certain time?
All those
How
things.
does yeah, how did that work for you? What was your days like? And were they the same all the time? Did you get
No,
to travel
oh
or do
yeah,
anything?
there were lots of
Yeah?
good adventures along the way. Like,
Okay.
so I was in a teaching order, so I taught in a private high
Okay.
school, and I was the head of the mathematics department at this very prestigious private school. So there was just the day to day of having a job teaching. That's a lot, and then there's the day to day monastic routine of meditation and prayer and community service and cooking. A lot of cleaning. A lot of dishes to
Yeah.
do, a lot of floors to scrub. So that
Yeah.
was maybe the less glamorous parts of it, but it's just it's like you've got a community and it's like a family, and you've got all the things that any family needs to take care of. Getting the
Yeah.
yard cleaned up and getting the trash out the street every day. So but every day was a little different, just like life is. And we had our summers off, so we would take every summer to do an intensive retreat as a community out to California. We go out to the Big Sur area and Monterey, California. We had a retreat center there, and so we would get a couple months off to just really go deep at that point. That was really my favorite part. And we traveled, spent some time in Italy, spent a summer in Rome, spent a summer in India in an ashram living there for a bit. So got to
Oh,
travel the
amazing.
world and see lots of cool things. And it was a lot of good adventures.
Yeah, yeah. That sounds really, really interesting. Was it hard to leave? Was it
Yeah,
difficult to transition back to regular life?
very difficult because you're leaving everything you know. You're leaving your career, you're leaving
Yeah.
your friends, you're leaving your family, you're leaving your faith in a way. Like I had to kind of let some of that
Yeah.
go, and it was a very very difficult transition. One of the hardest points of my life for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So much of our stories, even though they're totally not the same, I really feel I resonate with just because, we were very much embedded in a very strong Ashtanga yoga culture or lineage where, it
Mhm.
wasn't so much about being in the monastery, but, going to India every year and
Mhm.
spending 2, 3, 4, 6 months in India
Mhm.
just practicing and doing your routine and going through the rituals and studying and learning um and then, when that kind of like you say, sometimes these groups and organizations become a little bit like uh a separation. You sort of enter a trial separation
Yep.
period.
Yep.
And, it's really challenging when your career, your identity, your friends,
Mhm.
your, group of support people are all wrapped up in a culture
Mhm.
or a community that you're starting to maybe move away from in some ways.
Exactly. Yep. You,
Yeah,
you
and the
understand.
faith too is very difficult
Yeah.
because yeah, what was that like? It feels a little bit like a dark night of the soul maybe, like questioning.
Oh yeah, it was everything was in turmoil. Like just there was no part of my life that felt stable at that point because everything was in
Mhm,
flux and a new career and a new I transitioned into finance,
mhm.
and so and my career was going well, but it was still a new career and hustling and there's a lot of hustle and then a lot of uncertainty and but it brought me here and here's good.
Yeah, and probably feeling like you're catching up too,
Yeah.
like, what just happened? Like, yeah, I mean, amazing experiences, right? But then
Mhm.
you're kind of like left life for 20 years, and now you're kind of scrambling to catch up to
Exactly. And maybe made some
something.
mistakes trying to catch up a little too fast. I think I should have some
Right.
things I could have slowed my roll a little bit. Maybe would have been a little bit wiser. But I kind of tend to throw myself into things, and that's just kind of
Yeah.
how I roll. But
Yeah,
definitely,
sounds like it. So, this fascination or interest in the Enneagram, was it something that started during your years as a Benedictine monk, or did it come up after?
not at all. So I got this book deal from HarperCollins. They gave me a two
Yeah.
book contract, 6-figure contract a
Yeah.
couple years ago. It's a big deal. Maybe just backtrack for your audience, just kind of
Yeah, yeah.
to give them a little more fill in some gaps here. We've hit the
Please.
highlights, but there's
Yes.
some filler here. Maybe we should let them in on.
Yeah. Fill it
So
in, fill it in.
so I grew up in a town called Naperville, Illinois, in suburbia of
Yeah.
Chicago, and I grew up in a fairly affluent family. My dad was an executive for an oil company, and um,
Mhm.
but money in our house was, if from my childhood perspective, which was very limited, of course, it felt like money was weaponized. Like money was the tool that
Mm.
people used to control each other and harm each other and get compliance. And uh, a lot of times I would say love felt conditional, like you do what we want you to do, you get stuff, and if you don't get stuff. And so it's sort of
Mhm.
this transactional nature to affection and love at times. And my parents were they're good people and loving in their own way, but they had their money traumas. They grew up in poor immigrant families, so they had a lot of money anxiety, and they kind of tried to live the American dream and scramble their way up, and they did well for themselves in many ways. But when my parents divorced, kind of everything kind of flew apart, and then money became this real tool to hurt each other and
Mm.
kind of played financial chicken with their kids sometimes. Like, you ask your dad for something, he's like, I gave your mom all my money. Ask her. He asked my mom. She said, well,
Right.
your dad has all the money. Ask him. And you end up actually not having as much
Mhm.
stuff as a lot of friends who were just middle class. It's like
Yeah.
just wasn't anything there. And so that my brothers and I all rebelled in our own way, and eventually we all took a vow of poverty. I joined a monastery to get away from the world of money and materialism. My twin brother ran off and became a homesteader in upstate Vermont, and was adopted
Oh,
by a Native American tribe up there, an Abenaki family. And then my older brother ran off and joined a grunge band in Seattle. And so we all basically rejected the world of materialism in different ways. Um,
wow.
and so
Any band we might know?
Um, no, probably not. I mean, they were moderately successful, and then they had some
Yeah.
issues, and
What was their name?
I don't remember. I don't. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't remember.
That's fine, that's fine. I'm just
So many
teasing.
years ago. He'll
I
kick me
know.
for that. But they had some success. They had they got 2 album deal and did all right.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but then the lifestyle it was hard on him. It was just brutal. So now he's an accountant, the bookkeeper, and
Wow.
does that.
Okay.
But
Wow.
so
Is your other brother still in Vermont?
no, he's now at Bard College. He is a piano technician and restoration. He does piano restoration repair, and he's in charge of all the concert halls and all the instruments for the college. So he oversees their music program on the kind of the technical side.
Wow. You all have very interesting paths that you
Yeah.
took.
And so
Yeah.
anyway, so then I joined the monastery in part. It was a great way to really piss my parents off. It was really kind of an act of rebellion. I was trying to flabbergast them, and I succeeded at that. That was a great way to annoy them. But I thought I was, leaving the world of money and materialism forever. And I wanted nothing to do with it and the capitalistic system and the whole rat race and yada, yada. But it turns out that I was living in a community where we all hated dealing with money and none of us wanted to have any. We all kind of had a very negative mindsets around it. And we basically took the vow of poverty maybe a little too seriously. And about 3 years into my 20 years in the monastery, the community went bankrupt because there was a lot of deferred maintenance and just a lot of medical stuff, and bills are piling up. And so, by a weird twist of fate, the responsibility for digging the community out of that hole fell into my shoulders, and I just walked into a bookstore one day and just grabbed every book on finance I could find and just started reading them. That's what my undergrad degree gave me, the ability to just pick up books and learn from a book. So I did that. It took a few years to put the community back on a solid financial footing, and I did that and realized I had some talent with that. It was a skill set I could develop. Yeah. And since I was teaching at the time, I realized it was a school. The real problem is we send kids out in the world financially illiterate, and they get into all these kinds of problems with credit cards and student loans and everything because they don't know how the world of money works. So I started teaching econ and personal finance as an elective, and it became a very popular course and my favorite thing to teach. And fast forward a few more years, and one day for a class project, I opened up the school retirement plan to show the kids how it worked. Like, let's just give them a real world, let's give them something to play with. And then it turns out it was a train wreck. The whole thing was a disaster. For those who know financial lingo, there's this thing called fiduciary duty, which was not being exercised appropriately. The funds were performing poorly. The fees were high. The plan design was terrible, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, well, let's go find a better company to do a better job. And I didn't find any ones that I really liked that would really take on the fiduciary duty for the plan and really take it serious and do what I thought would be a good job. And I realized it was a problem not just at my school, but at almost every school across the country. And so I thought, well, this is a pain point. And this is something I have some talent at and something I'm passionate about. So I could start a business, and this could be a new career. And so I built my own investment advisory firm while I was inside of a monastery, which is the most batshit crazy idea anyone's ever come up with, I suspect. And then I left the monastery, and quickly I was way over my head. I really didn't know what I was doing. And so I merged my firm with a larger company here in Santa Fe called Longview Asset Management, which is a sustainable B corporation. And then right when that happened, the New York Times was doing an expo. They did for once a month, every month for 6 months. They did a big, full spread expose on the problem of teacher retirement plans across the country. And this was happening right while I was launching my business. And so I shot them a little email. I just reached out on Facebook to a guy named Ron Lieber, who's the financial columnist for the New York Times, and told him my story. And he got excited, flew out to Santa Fe, did a big article on me, and that hit the front page of the New York Times. The business section went viral. That really launched my career in finance. And so I branched out from beyond just doing teacher retirement plans and doing individual wealth management and a lot of other cool stuff. And I built the first environmentally sustainable retirement plan for any school or nonprofit in the country. A couple other cool milestones along the way. Wrote my first book. Then I got my book deal. Agents from New York reached out and said, "Hey, you got a cool story. You want to do a book?" I'm like, I'm not a writer. Well, I am now. So I'm not going to pass up a book deal, 2-book deal. It's sort of like winning the literary lottery. Nobody gets those kind of
yeah, totally. Nobody gets those deals anymore.
with no platform and no publications and nothing, right? Nothing under my belt. But I sent them some sample chapters and they liked it, and off we go. So that was my first book, which is From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay. So that's my first book. It's really a how-to book. It's a good basic primer on the nuts and bolts of financial management. And I just used my stories as hooks, like the stories of the monastery, stories of my clients working in finance, just to kind of teach people, the ins and outs of how to. And now, coming full circle to your question about the Enneagram. So I had this 2-book deal, but now what's the second book going to be on? And so what I was looking for was a way to help people have a healthier and more ethical relationship to money and wealth. And I needed to, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to build a system out that to help people have a more ethical relationship to money. I need a framework that transcends religion, politics, and culture. Like, what would be some framework that I could sort of map money and finance onto that would do the trick, that people could appreciate no matter where they're coming at from, whatever walk of life. And so I tried a couple different systems. I first started working with a thing called spiral dynamics, which is super complicated and crazy, and integral theory, which you may be familiar with. And so I spent about 2.5 years writing a book on integral theory, spiral dynamics, and money.
Wow.
And it worked, but I sent the draft, kind of the outline of the book in the first chapters to my publisher, and they're like, no, it works, but no one's going to read it. Who's going to read that book? And I'm like, well, nobody, right? Because it needs to be a mass market publication. That's what my publisher wanted, and that's what I wanted. So,
of course.
And I just kind of threw this Hail Mary pass at them. I had a good friend of mine whose name is Richard Rohr, who I've known for 30 years. He and he's kind of
just like you've just known him for 30 years.
Well, he was at he said the mass at my ordination ceremony when I took my final vows as a monk. So that's how I met him for the first time.
Amazing.
And we've managed to have a very robust friendship over the years. So he kind of taught me about the Enneagram along the way. I knew enough to be dangerous, but not just enough to know my type, and just kind of. But I never gravitated to the Enneagram because it always felt very woo woo to me. Like, I'd ask Richard, like, well, why does it work? And he'd just be like, I don't know. Nobody knows. It just works. So it just seems to work. So I can't explain why, but it's useful. So why not use it? And I'm like, well, that doesn't really satisfy my philosophical math mind very well.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was desperate and I didn't want to lose my book contract, and I needed something to send my publisher. So like, well, what if I tried the same thing with the Enneagram? And then I got 12 hours later, yes, we want that book. The Enneagram is popular. Do it. I'm like, oh shit. So now I got to become an expert in the Enneagram. But which would serve me well, and it was fun. It was a fun project because what I've done with this book is I really, without knowing the why behind why something works, I can't teach it. I can't explain it to myself, then I can't explain it to anybody else. So I had to really reinvent the Enneagram from the ground up to put it on really strong foundation, a strong intellectual foundation, and ground it in both childhood developmental psychology and ground it in the latest neurobiology, which I think I've successfully done, which I think is a pretty big breakthrough in the Enneagram. So, and I've changed the system in a lot of ways. I've changed a lot of the terminology. I've created a more streamlined approach. I've created a kind of a 3D model for the whole thing rather than the traditional 2D kind of circle thing people might be familiar with going around. So a lot of improvements, a lot of I think upgrades for it to make it just so as you know, in philosophy or mathematics, if you want to start any system, you have to ground it in axiomatic assumptions. You have to state what are your unprovable assumptions. Everything needs them, even math, right? And so that was my quest to figure out, well, what are the fundamental assumptions of the Enneagram? How do I communicate them, and how I build a deductive logical system step by step from the simplest beginnings all the way up to the highest states of enlightenment.
Amazing. I mean, it's so interesting that this kind of fell into your lap after being a monk, because it is kind of, as just often described, like it's used in a lot of Christian mystic circles and just also Christian circles, but also like non-Christian spiritual, it's like a spiritual personality, typing or patterning system.
Well, I would say it's the physics of consciousness. It's really it's so it's an ancient system, and we can trace it back to the Egyptians, to the Greeks. It goes all the way back because it's like mathematics. It's like, who discovered mathematics? Well, it's always been there. The Enneagram's always been there, but we really didn't get our head around it. It wasn't until two guys named Oscar Chazo and Claudio Naranjo in the late 20th century really started putting some meat on the bones of the Enneagram and really tying it into the best of psychology they had at the time. And I'd like to think I'm kind of continuing their lineage a bit and saying, okay, can we kick it up another notch? Can we really ground it in the science? And so to understand, how does a human personality form? Because there's only so many ways you can design a human ego and have it be roadworthy. Like, so I use car metaphors a lot because cars are kind of helpful. Like everyone drives.
I noticed that.
Everyone, and I'm actually not a car guy. It was a metaphor that it just started. I had like 10 different metaphors in the book, and then like my publisher was like, pick one. All right, well, and it just worked, so I kind of stuck with it. Even though cars aren't really my thing that much, but it's all good. So you have to think of your personality like it has really two components to it. It's got a nature and a nurture, right? So your nature is your DNA, and that's going to be predetermined on how your genes express by your environment and all the things. But then the other part, what the Enneagram is it's your nurture part. That's the kind of the ego defenses that your personality developed in childhood to help you survive, and you needed it, and it was necessary. But then those ego defenses that play out over time, particularly in your adult life, they can become maladaptive, and they can get us into all kinds of trouble. And so, particularly around money. So that's the thing, is like, how do we? The Enneagram tells you kind of what's the lens through which you view all of reality. It's sort of like, there's a story by David Foster Wallace. He tells a story of these two young fish swimming up a river, and there's an older fish coming down, and the older fish says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And swims on, and one of the younger fish turns to the other one and says, "What the hell is water?" Like, right? And the Enneagram's like, it's the water you've always been swimming in. It's that thing through which you view all of reality. You just don't know it until someone points it out to you. And we all have blind spots, and they're usually bigger than we think. And so it's just, the Enneagram tells you, it's kind of like the user's manual for your ego. And there's just, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, there's 9 archetypal patterns of personality in the Enneagram, because there's 9 core ego defense mechanisms that we develop in childhood to help us navigate the biggest stressors in that childhood environment. And we go into, I could go off from there, but that's essentially what it is, and that's kind of how I got into it.
What were the 2 axioms that you came up with that like created the structure of?
Sure. Well, there's just one.
Yeah.
So there's one axiomatic assumption. And so you have to kind of do a thought experiment and think about, what was it like when you were in your mother's womb, when your consciousness first flickers on? And the axiomatic assumption is that you were in a state of unconscious unity. So you didn't have a clear sense of self or not self. Your ego isn't formed yet. So you're unconscious. You're not aware of you. And you're in unity with everything you can experience, even though it's extremely limited, right? And then from that assumption, then there can be neonatal trauma, which I skip over because it's too complicated for this book, and it's dense enough as it is. But at any point, you get popped out of the womb, and surprise, you realize there's more to reality than just me. Right? There's me, and there's a lot of these other things that are not me, and you need to become aware of them pretty quickly, or they'll get you killed. But there's a physical umbilical cord that then gets cut, and then you're physically separated from your mother. But then there's this psychological umbilical cord that forms immediately that bonds you very tightly with your caregivers, and it creates an egoic codependence, because your caregivers have to do the driving for reality for you for the first several years of your life. So they're really kind of doing all the work, and you don't even have what's called object permanence. Like, you can play peekaboo with a child, right? Because when your face disappears, they think you've disappeared. They don't understand these things, that they're not looking at it. It doesn't exist to them. So there's this whole maturation of individuation and personality has to form in your childhood. But what we've learned from the Enneagram is that, and what we've learned from the neuroscience, is that psychological umbilical cord has to be cut, right? You can't be egoically codependent on your parents forever. You have to develop, and there's a natural maturation process that occurs. And some of it's a little more traumatic than others, but it's traumatic for all of us, and to some extent. And you can only cut that psychological umbilical cord with sharp negative emotions, because positive emotions will just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. And a lot of those negative emotions come through the nose that we get, through the, don't touch the hot stove, or don't kick the dog, or don't bite your sister, right? And so we get hit with these, it's necessary for us to, for our parents to set boundaries for us, and create a container for our ego, and respect the boundary between ourselves and others. And so that's what we call the individuation process and the maturation process. But we know from the neuroscience, there's only 3 core negative emotions. And this is from the work of a guy named Jaak Panksepp, who was a pioneering affective neuroscientist. I forgot, maybe in the 70s and 80s. I don't think he's still around anymore. But anyway, and many other scientists have built on his work. But we know that in the mid-limbic region of all mammals, and particularly in humans as well, the big 3 negative emotions are anger, sadness or shame. You could think of it as sadness or shame. Both are kind of interchangeable. It's a kind of grief or separation, anxiety or loss. But essentially anger, sadness, and fear. So anger, sadness, and fear are the big three negative emotions. And your Enneagram type is determined by which of those three emotions you got hit with more of in your childhood environment. And so it creates what we call these three triads. So if you think of the Enneagram like a pie, like a pizza pie or an apple pie, whatever you want, actually a color wheel works better. So think of it as a color wheel. And we can break the color wheel into three quadrants, the anger, sadness, and fear quadrants. And then inside each of those, we can subdivide it three more times because there's three ways you can process that emotion. You can take that negative emotion and you can externalize it, which is kind of like having a food fight with the world, or you can internalize it. It's kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie, or you can have both. And so that's so 3 by 3 gives us 9. That's why there's 9 personality types in the Enneagram. There's 3 core negative emotions, 3 ways to process each of those emotions. And then that determines, I call that your sacred wound. That sacred wound is how that psychological umbilical cord is cut. And then it creates for each of us, it creates a unique unconscious fear, or our greatest unconscious fear, that then our shadow structure grows in childhood, and our ego grows to kind of protect us from that greatest fear. And it does a good job. It's necessary. But over time, as we talked about earlier, it can really drive our lives into a ditch if we're not mindful of it. And so in the quest to outrun our greatest fear, one of the great paradoxes is it tends to, in time, create that very fear, bring it to life if we're not mindful of it. And that creates all kinds of suffering. And then there's the whole money component. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question.
It was great. That was like the most succinct way anyone's ever described the Enneagram.
Right. And so
good.
maybe just go back to that axiomatic assumption,
Yeah.
is that you're starting in unconscious unity. Then you're moving to conscious separation. That's sort of the midlife. Your ego is.
Yeah.
So I've drawn the Enneagram as a double cone. And so think of like 2 traffic cones stuck together, right, at their bases. So the bottom of that peak of that one cone is where your consciousness first comes on the womb. Then the bottom half, your shadow structure grows in childhood and develops to what I would call peak ego inflation, where the highest, where you begin to, your ego is sort of so strong, it's almost like a blowfish that's puffed up, and it creates a sense of separation, not just from others and from the rest of reality, but can even create a sense of separation from your spiritual connections or your sense of divine. And that can throw you into what we call the dark night of the soul, which we all go through at some point. And then the Enneagram, it gives us a path through that dark night where our then ego can break open and we can move into our enlightenment structure, which is the top half of that double cone. And that path is unique for each Enneagram type. There's a very clear linear path I've mapped out for each of the 9 types and what that looks like. But then the point really, as I'm sure you know from your own spiritual practice, is that the highest point there is conscious unity. So that's what we're trying to get people to, is to that awakening and that enlightenment, even briefly, in moments of meditation or prayer or contemplation or whatever it is that that your spiritual practice is trying to help people reach that sense of conscious unity so they can live in love and service to the world around them. And then money becomes a tool for that service.
Yeah, wow. That is beautiful. I really hope everyone gets this book because I have had a good time reading it. And I loved also that you brought in the attachment styles and combined the attachment styles with the Enneagram work with how you're managing money or relating to money, which was really, really fascinating.
Yeah. So to explain to your listeners how this works, so you've got your 9 Enneagram archetypes, and there's infinite variety inside each of the 9 types. So it's like a color, all the colors in the rainbow fit inside any one of these. But then what I've layered on top of it is what I call the attachment theory of money, which is based on the attachment theory of relationships, which if for those who are familiar with it or not, basically what the attachment theory of money says is just like in our romantic relationships, we can have a healthy attachment to money, which is what the book is trying to help people achieve. But we can also have an unhealthy attachment to it. And it tends to manifest in one of 2 ways. One would be overly anxiously attached to it, where we're sort of a little too greedy, to kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge, like money, money, money. It's just constant money anxiety, around finances. Or you can be fearfully avoidant of it, like I was when I joined the monster. Like I wanted nothing to do with it, I'm pushing it away, rejecting it, thinking that money is evil, the world of finance is bad, or some whatever prejudice is in your head. And that can manifest in different areas of our lives. So there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance. So we can be called, most of us are sort of a jumbled mix of these 2, anxious and avoidant, depending on the area of our financial life that we're talking about. So the 4 pillars of finance are going to be earning, making a living, saving, you got to save more than you earn or you'll always be broke. Then investing and, harnessing the power of compound interest to build real wealth, and then giving. And we all have an ethical, I think, responsibility to give back to our community in whatever way we're called to. And so within those four pillars, you can be anxious in one area and avoid in another, or you can kind of flip flop depending on the time of day or your mood. So it's helping people be aware of those tendencies, and we tend to gravitate to more towards anxiety or avoidance in general, but tends to manifest in particular areas of our lives more than others. So people might be like, there might be anxious earners. Like my dad he made a lot of money, but he also spent a lot. And so he didn't do a great job on the saving side and the investing side. So, or some people I know are really generous givers, but they don't save and invest. And so they don't really have a lot left for their own needs and for their retirement. So there's just different ways of approaching it. And each Enneagram type, it tends to have strengths and weaknesses in each of those areas.
Yeah, and I found it interesting in your book. You also talked about like how the pattern or the core wound also affects these different areas, or like the way that this type of pattern would manifest.
Exactly right. Do you mind sharing your type? Would that be?
Yeah, I'll share my I've done it if people haven't listened to previous episodes. But no, I'm a 3.
Oh, we're both threes. Hey, terrific.
I was wondering if you were a 3.
Totally. Oh, we got lots to talk about.
Yeah. I was like, interesting. Our lives share a similar pattern. Yeah. The sports car,
Yes.
which I also found really fun, looking at the different like associations of the car with your type. And I was like, oh yeah, I see that. I
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. And so for listeners who aren't familiar with the Enneagram, so
Mhm.
type 3, I call them they're often called the achiever, but I call them
Yeah.
the race car because we're always gunning for the next achievement, crossing the finish line, getting the gold star, get the pat in the head, be teacher's pet, whatever it is to win approval and validation. But we tend to leave our authentic selves in the dust behind us. We're so busy people pleasing and trying to win the accolades. We're always wearing different masks to please the people around us. It's very easy to lose sense of who we really are.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a fascinating pattern too, because you don't stop and acknowledge your own achievements or successes.
Right.
Like you don't see your own goodness,
Yeah.
or your own worth is like probably the number that struggles with self-worth the most, maybe.
I think they all have their own struggles.
They
I think
do, they
everybody in the
do.
sadness triad or the shame triad is struggling with it in a different way. But so
Yeah.
as you know, the greatest fear for a type 3 is being worthless, because our psychological umbilical cord got cut by that sacred wound of both internalized sadness, meaning we feel sad or ashamed about how we perceive ourselves, and an externalized sadness, meaning we feel sad or shame or grief about how we think others perceive us. So we're living in this sort of
Mhm.
stereophonic shame bubble all the time, where it creates our greatest fear of being worthless. So we're always trying to just achieve one more thing. And maybe if we just get enough accolades built up, it'll finally assuage this empty tank of self-worth that we're just struggling with all the time. So yeah.
Yeah. And so then how would that, let's just relate it to
Mm-hmm.
finances. Like how does that show up then in how we're handling our financial well-being?
Well, if you're money avoidant, like I still have a tendency. I still my default. I still have to work on it. It doesn't just go away, but it's a journey for all of us to become the healthiest version of ourselves. But for the money avoidant type 3, I call them the barrier. Like they bury their head in the sand like an ostrich. They just don't want to look at it. They don't want to deal with it because it creates too much anxiety, too much shame, too much grief. It's just all of it. And so we tend to just ignore it, and that creates more problems, which then build up, which we get more shame around and bare our heads, and then it kind of spirals out of control, and things go
Mhm.
to pieces if we're not careful about it. And then the other side was what I call the blinger. So the type 3 blinger is the one who's very anxious about money, and they just they want all the status symbols. They want the nice house, the nice car, the fancy watch, the trophy wife, the trophy husband, whatever it is that they think is going to win the approval of society, the people around them, even if it's outside their budget. And so they can really overextend themselves financially or work themselves to the bone trying to make a lot of money so they can have all the things, but maybe not fundamentally. If they're not mindful of it, then they can really lose their authentic self and lose their sense of real happiness.
Yeah, it sounds like that's sort of the maybe a very dominant pattern in our culture that we think about when
Mm-hmm.
we think about, highly successful people who achieve all of
Yeah.
the things and have a very large bank account, but then sort of come to this conclusion or this feeling of like, well, it's all meaningless or it's all worthless.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
people say that different cultures are different Enneagram types. So that there's the kind of general consensus that America tends to be a type 3 culture.
Yeah.
And so we really reward type 3s a lot. We sort of the model, the ethos of the American dream in many ways, but it also creates a lot of anxiety and problems spiritually, especially for all of us.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting too with the Enneagram, when you go into a stress response, like the area of stress or the area of sort of unhealthiness where you sort of go into versus growth.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about the 9
Okay.
because that's also interesting because
Yeah.
that's the peacemaker,
Right.
right? And there is a relationship to the 3 that we tend to kind of like, you know, hang back when we're under stress and like want to go into like I'm just not going to
Mm-hmm.
participate or disrupt the apple cart because I'm not feeling secure in myself right now. And so but the 9 is often I think pedestaled in spiritual communities is like the highest kind of number, no? Like the peacemaker, the one who's just like not disrupting anything.
I mean, I think it's a projection. I think it's a
Yeah,
it,
projection.
it's
That's what
like
I
it's
mean.
like
It's not the highest.
no, there's no highest type
No.
anyway. So the thing about the 9 and their real problem is that they're sitting on a volcano of anger. They're in the anger triad. So they have this deep internalized anger at themselves in their childhood because they couldn't meet their own needs as a child. And there's an external anger at their environment because the external environment wasn't meeting their needs either. So they learn to shut their needs down. They learn to get along by getting along, just by basically by not expressing their needs or desires. They create this kind of harmony and peace around them, but they have a really hard time standing up for themselves, or sometimes, or really getting their needs met or expressing what they really think. They tend to merge their opinions with the people around them, and they tend to go with the flow. But the problem with that is because it's based on so we all have a worst vice, right? So for the type 3s, our worst vice is deceit. We're always changing masks to please the people around us. And the worst vice for a 9 is sloth, like is not taking action to like really resolve the conflicts in front of them because they don't want to face the tension or the anger or all the issues that arise when a conflict when they're confronted with a conflict. And so they tend to brush things under the rug. And so nothing ever gets resolved. And they tend to have a hard time, building up a robust financial life if they're not mindful about that. So it's not, they're
Right.
so the peacemaker is, it's in a way, we should be thinking about each of these labels. They're somewhat pejorative, right? It's like, yeah, you're the peacemaker, but so what you want for a 9 to get to is what I would call a harmonizer, not a peacemaker. So harmony comes after
We found her.
you
We
found her.
found Harmony
There
finally.
you are. And so real harmony comes after a fight is resolved. Like that's where the real peace comes, when you've confronted the conflict, you've resolved the issue, and the Hegelian dialectic, right? Synthesis, antithesis, and resolution. Did I get that right? Anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah. Thesis, antithesis,
middle
antithesis,
age,
and synthesis. Right.
Yes, there you
That
go.
was it. And so that's the thing that the 9s have a hard time doing. They have a hard time resolving those opposites. And so it isn't like they're higher than the rest of us. They just have a different set of problems to deal with.
Yeah, totally. But I think like when we look at the name or, we feel like, oh, well, it's best not we, but like spiritual kind of communities can kind of really value this pattern because it doesn't rock the boat. It just kind of goes with the flow or like with whatever everyone's saying. And it's not trying to stand out. It's just,
Yep.
this sort of this dynamic. But then so with money, I mean, if you bring in these attachment styles, avoidant or anxious, how does that look in someone who's just kind of like going with the flow and not really like creating boundaries for themselves or
Mm-hmm.
really asserting themselves in any particular direction?
Yeah. So the 2 money monsters for type 9, I call them the spud and the dud. So the spud is sort of like the couch potato who just, they could take action, but they never kind of get off the couch and get to work. And that's where we as 3 will go to in stress a lot of times, where we're just, when we've caused a lot of problems through our vanity or our ego addictions and whatnot, we kind of fall back into that as kind of our default way of looking at life is sort of like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look how wonderful I am. And then when that's causing problems for ourselves, when our deceit or our vanity are out of control, then it's like, well, you can't use more of vanity to solve the problems that vanity has caused. So we have this ego stress response, right, which is to retreat kind of into this evasion of a type 9. And so,
Yeah, I'm just gonna lie here and binge Netflix and
yes,
not show up for anyone.
yep, yep. I know it well. I know it very well. And so for the 9, there's a spud, and then there's the dud, which is the 9 who is money anxious, but there's a lot of flurry of activity, but nothing ever really gets accomplished because they don't really want to face the conflict to resolve the real issues in front of them. So they can be a whirlwind of activity. So it doesn't look like they're being slothful exactly, but they are in a way because they don't really want to face the real problem in front of them.
Oh, interesting. It's fascinating. I work with a lot of like entrepreneurs. So, I'm just thinking, so say there was a yoga teacher who was type 9 in the Enneagram, and if they were in this sort of anxious pattern
Mhm.
of dealing with finances, it might be like rather than doing the thing where you're creating students, like going out and offering a class somewhere, or finding ways to create income for your business,
Mhm.
for your studio, you're just maybe like getting busy posting on Instagram, or
Yeah,
buying new Lululemon clothes, or
exactly.
like
Exactly.
yeah, like cleaning the studio or
Mhm.
reorganizing the mats,
Yep.
or doing like busy work but not actually doing the work that's going to create financial health for your
You
business.
nailed it.
Okay. Amazing. I love this. This is it's such a profound way to look at money and look at our patterns around money. So what can someone do if they've sort of gone through your book,
Mhm.
and do they need to know their Enneagram type before coming to the book?
No, not at all. I mean, the book is, I think it tries to be self-contained, but if you need help, you can go to my website, douglynam.com, and there's an Enneagram test there that people can take that I really like. It's called the IEQ9 Enneagram assessment, and I get a kickback if you take it off my website and take the test there. So just a little plug for me. But it's also the most scientifically rigorous test out there. A lot of the free tests are about 50% accurate. So if you do the free tests online, you kind of get what you pay for. So it's worth a couple bucks to just do a good one and get it right. But if you just
Yeah.
read the book, I think your type will pop out at you pretty quickly if you just follow along.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing that I really love about the Enneagram also, as far as a personality typing test, is that you can take the test and it usually gives you like your top 3,
Mhm.
or sometimes it gives you sort of your score in all of them, but really the way that you understand and identify your own pattern, because the Enneagram doesn't really tell you who you are, it tells you who you're not, right? It
Yeah.
tells you what your pattern
Yes.
is, that you typically go to solve your problems
Mhm.
or to face the world with.
Mhm.
And the only one, I mean, ultimately, no matter what a test says, is you know
Right.
yourself, and you're the one that gets to decide
Yep.
which type is reflecting, is, being your best mirror. And it's usually the one that kind of has a cringe factor for you, like someone says something, you're like, "Oh,
Uh,
don't say that."
mhm. Yep.
Don't say that about me.
That's typically, you found your type when when the cringe factor hits hard and you're like, oh, that's not me, is it? Please don't let that be me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so good. And then you're like, "Oh,
yeah.
that's the thing I don't wanna see in
Yeah,
myself."
if you
Okay.
like your type too much, you're probably picking the wrong one.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's not who you want to be.
It's kind of like
It's kinda who you don't wanna be.
finding your Enneagram type for the first time is kind of like sitting on a cactus. It's just, it's not fun, but our Enneagram type is the source of most of the self-created suffering in our lives. And if we don't face it, then we're just unconsciously creating more suffering for ourselves. And most importantly, we're creating suffering for the people around us that we love. And so we need to learn how to be the healthiest expression of our type so we can live a life of more love and service.
Yeah, and I love that part too, that it really brings in this like the holistic picture, and that no type is better or worse than any other type. They're just different
Right.
patterns or different wounds
Right.
that we carry, and ways that it shows up in dealing with our environment and our
Yeah.
problems, and how we think that we're going to succeed the most in life or get the best results for ourselves is by doing this particular thing. And like you say, it works for a while, but at some point it becomes an obstacle to our development and growth.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I think the car metaphor is helpful. It's like, we want to be there's no lemons in the car lot of the
Yeah.
Enneagram, right? But they each are designed for a different kind of journey. Like some of them are better for off-road, some are better for highways, some are better for getting into tight, compact spaces. Like, and we need all types. And just it's
Yeah.
about knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, and minimizing the weaknesses and maximizing the strengths.
Yeah. You don't want to go camping in like your Ferrari.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you think that, like, I guess a reader or a you know, spiritually directed person, would be able to, I don't know, come to terms, like help to understand how they can thrive financially without these feelings of guilt or shame, or, without also spiritually
Hmm.
bypassing their financial wellness part of it? Because I mean, at the end of the day, having money and being financially healthy
Hmm.
is part of living a holistic, you know, life. Like having wealth is part of your spiritual practice. So how can we kind of understand that?
Well, I think you explained it very well. Um,
Oh, great.
um, yeah, it's that money is a tool for action. Like you can't really
Yeah.
do much in life without money. Every little thing, whether it's just being on a podcast, electricity, paying the bills, we gotta pay for the
Yeah.
internet and all the things that go with it just to be here having this conversation. And so you really, you can't go to your drive to a yoga class without gas in your car. So money is an essential tool for getting anything done in this world, and it really does make the world go around. So, and I think there's this, and I've been guilty of this for much of my life, but I had this false dichotomy that somehow spirituality and financial security were antithetical to each other. That somehow, in fact, that there was something virtuous in being poor, and it's like, no, actually it's not. Poverty is one of the great, I would call it a great curse of life for people who have to endure it,
Yeah.
because everything you don't want gets worse as your socioeconomic status goes down. So we know from the research that your socioeconomic status has a bigger impact on your longevity and mortality than anything else. So poor people, have higher rates of obesity, drug abuse, domestic violence, workplace injury, disease, everything you don't, diabetes,
Mm.
alcoholism, everything you don't want gets worse as your income level goes down. And so it's really, I like to think of myself at times as a kind of a suffering prevention specialist, trying to help people avoid the suffering that poverty can create in their lives. As Mark Twain humorously said, like, the lack of money is the root of all evil. Like that's the thing that really gets people
Yeah.
into trouble. And now you can get yourself in trouble with money too, but that's a better class of problems to have, to be sure. And so it's trying to teach people that your spiritual life and your financial life are not incompatible. In fact, they work better together. And then the more
Mhm.
money you have, then the more, it's kind of like your superhero utility belt, and the more tools you have in your tool belt,
Mm.
the more you can do to fix the crack in the world that you were put on this planet to heal.
Yeah. I love that. I love that image, because I think it's so, yeah, it's so important. It's when we see money as just a form of energy, or, in Sanskrit we call it prana, right? Of life force, of
Yeah,
vitality, then it's here to we're here to be a good steward, or we're here to be a channel for
yeah,
it. And we're here to, the more you can hold, the more you can also give as well.
exactly. And some
Yeah.
of the, I mean, anybody who's ever been in deep financial stress knows it's like some of the biggest suffering is when the people around you need help financially and you can't give it. You know, when someone say be having a medical crisis and then there's bills to pay, it's like, and you can't help. It's like, that's especially if it's a family member, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? You know, mom needs a quadruple bypass heart surgery. What are we going to do? Like, well,
Yeah.
you know, insurance only goes so far. So that's just a simple example of just how important money is to be able to meet the basic needs of life. And then of course you go far beyond that and to build, using it to build something of real meaning for the world.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this book would help people address their money trauma, like that happened at a young age?
That's the whole,
Because I think that often affects our relationship to our current situation, also.
yeah, I mean that's the whole point of the book. Really, is dealing with your childhood traumas and wounds. Because the whole point is to get you to have a healthy relationship with money. You got to have a healthy relationship with yourself, and that means going deep into all the ugly stuff that we don't really want to look at. And it's not easy, and it's not always pleasant, but it is essential to really living your fullest and happiest life.
That's super powerful. Super powerful. I want to switch gears just slightly about your first book,
Mm-hmm.
From Monk to Money Manager.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what the title of it? Yeah. Um, is that where the 4 pillars come from, or is there other instructions in that book that we should know about?
Oh yeah, I mean, so that's a great book for people who might consider themselves financially illiterate. Essentially, if you don't know the language of finance, you don't know about insurance and taxes and investing and saving and budgeting and all how those things work. The first book is a how-to guide. It's a nuts and bolts, right? And this, whereas Taming Your Money Monster is a why do. It's really a book of psychological insights about why you make the same stupid mistakes over and over and over again. So they pair really well together. They're designed to almost be companion books, right? One's the how to, one's the why do.
Okay, okay, amazing. And do you think there's anything, I mean, other than reading your book and understanding your Enneagram and your childhood wounds and doing this deeper work, what kind of like practices would you recommend people do in their life in order to create, I mean, yes, inner peace, but also this sort of positive relationship with finances and wealth and money in their life?
Yeah, I mean, so again, it goes back to your Enneagram types. I think each Enneagram type has a different challenges to face, and so you know, it kind of depends on where you're at and what challenge you're working on. So it isn't easy to just say, well, here's a simple script that will everyone can just follow, because it really is going to need to be something that's detailed to you. And the book helps you figure that out. Like, where are you at and where is your real weakness? And then what are some practical strategies to overcome that particular weakness that you're dealing with? Because there's a huge variety of people on the planet and a huge variety of issues. So,
Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to three basic principles, which is the first one, and this is just basic spirituality 101. The first one is going to be contemplation, right? Having a contemplative practice, a meditation practice, something that's going to allow you to check in with yourself on a daily basis and really go deep inside and ground you with whatever your spiritual connection happens to be. And then the second piece is going to be compassion, is learning to have self-compassion for yourself and your mistakes, and most importantly, compassion for your caregivers and the people around you who created all those childhood wounds and traumas, because they're just doing the best they can. You know, wasn't really about you. You know, it may have been felt that way, and it's not easy for any of us, and some of us have a lot more trauma than others, to be sure. You know, depending on how that psychological and umbilical cord gets cut. If you're lucky, it gets cut slowly and easily and gently. But for some of it gets hacked really hard, really early, and that kind of trauma is very difficult to overcome. So there's a level of compassion for yourself, and then for your environment that created all these issues, and then the last part of it is just action, is using that contemplation to figure out, you know, what to do, and then the compassion is doing it with, you know, with love, and then putting that together into robust action and having a sort of a battle plan for your life of how you're going to move forward to confront these issues.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. Um, so if people want to find your book and go deep into it, where can they do that?
Oh, it's so it releases July.
It's
It's
everywhere.
everywhere. It comes out July 8th. You can pre-order on Amazon right now. I think this week is when it's dropping in all the other major booksellers. So you can pretty much find it. You should be able to get it just about anywhere at this point, but for sure on Amazon. You can always go to my website, DougLynam.com, DOUGLYNAM, and you can find all kinds of other resources there. You can find Enneagram test. I've got a Substack channel. I've got a YouTube channel. I got all kinds of videos out there. So those can be really helpful for people as well, in addition to the book.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I hope that everybody gets to dive in and understand the Enneagram in this way that you've described it, because I feel like it's really good. I've read a lot of books on the Enneagram, and the way that you just kind of, maybe it's an engineer's mind, I'm not sure. But you created it, described it so succinctly and in a really beautiful way. And then also, yeah, understanding how it can really help us thrive as, beings, not just on a spiritual level, but like putting it into practice in our finances too, and in our real life situations. So yeah, thank you so much for your offering and for coming up with this
Well,
paradigm.
thank you. And thanks for having a conversation with me about it. It's really an honor.
The spiral dynamics lost out.
Yeah, well, thank God. Oh, glad that didn't work out. I would have been in a nightmare. Nobody.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so fascinating. And your story is so rich. It's so interesting. So people can get both your books. They can find the monk turned money manager. It's already out, and this one will be out in July.
Yep.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Harmony. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. Maybe this conversation stirred something in you. If you're starting to see that your inner money story is shaping your outer financial reality, then I have something really, truly powerful for you. It's called manifestation activation. It is a subconscious reprogramming meditation that I created designed to help you rewire your mind, raise your frequency, and magnetize more aligned wealth to you without burnout, hustle, or self-sacrifice. You can think of it like a yoga nidra. It's the kind of energetic work that amplifies everything Doug and I spoke about in today's podcast. Shifting out of fear and guilt and scarcity and moving into a more grounded state of prosperity that actually feels good in your body. You can download it for free and start collapsing time around your desires right now. And if you're ready to take this work even deeper, I'd invite you to join me inside my 21-day Money Magic Manifestation Challenge. It's truly a transformational journey to help you heal your money wounds, expand your energetic capacity to receive, and fully align with wealth and your purpose. So, your next level is already calling. Are you ready to answer the call? Find the links in the show notes, and I'll see you inside. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.